The laughter hit her like a blade. Sharp. Unforgiving. Ilara froze mid-step, feeling her chest tighten, each heartbeat a drum of humiliation. The words of her intended mate still echoed in her ears, sharper than the winter wind cutting through the gathering. "I choose another," he had declared, his gaze never meeting hers, as if she were nothing more than a shadow he could ignore. Every pair of eyes at the clan gathering seemed to sharpen that rejection, 1,000 silent judgments piercing her. Her knees gave way, and she stumbled into the forest beyond the clearing, snow crunching underfoot, tears freezing on her cheeks. Each step carried her further from warmth, from firelight, from the world that had betrayed her. She had been rejected, not gently, not in quiet, but publicly, with all the weight of a clan's eyes upon her. She had been discarded like a broken thing. Branches clawed at her arms as she ran blindly through the underbrush, her breaths ragged, misting in the freezing air. The forest felt alive around her, shadows curling like fingers, whispers of leaves sounding like the laughter that haunted her mind. Every snap of a twig made her flinch, every rustle in the darkness made her heart pound faster. And then she smelled it. A stench of wet fur and danger, something darker than the night itself, moving silently among the trees. Her stomach knotted. Wolves. Rogue wolves. Predators that had no mercy for the weak, no compassion for the heartbroken. Panic surged, and she stumbled over a hidden root, collapsing onto her hands and knees. Her body shook, not just from cold, but from the terror that someone, or something, was hunting her. A low, rumbling growl rolled through the air, shaking the silence. She froze, pressed her back to a tree, trembling. 2 glowing amber eyes appeared in the darkness, and for a moment, she thought she had met death itself. But the growl was different, controlled, measured, full of power that made the forest itself still. The wolves hesitated, ears flattening, as though sensing a presence they dared not challenge. Then he stepped from the shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impossibly still, Kale moved with a grace that seemed to command the very night. He did not rush to her. He did not speak. Yet every muscle, every motion, radiated a quiet, undeniable power. The rogue wolves scattered at his approach, retreating into the darkness, leaving only silence and the sound of Ilara's ragged breaths. She sank to the ground, shivering, fear and awe warring inside her. The shame of earlier, the sting of rejection, all seemed smaller beneath the weight of his presence. Kale's amber eyes held hers, steady, unjudging, yet somehow seeing every hidden corner of her soul, the kindness unnoticed, the resilience ignored, the hurt too deep to speak aloud. "You shouldn't wander here alone," he said, his voice low, calm, carrying an authority that made the cold forest feel safe, as if it existed only because he allowed it. I had nowhere else," she whispered, voice trembling, catching on the frost-laden air. He did not step closer, yet she felt an invisible pull, a quiet promise that danger would not touch her while he watched. He did not offer pity, nor a soft word of comfort. Just observation, a silent acknowledgement that she was seen, for the first time truly seen. A branch snapped in the distance, a reminder that predators still prowled. She flinched, ready to run, but something rooted her in place. It was not safety, exactly, but an understanding that Kale's presence was not merely protection, it was a test. He had let her stumble, let her fear, and yet he had arrived exactly when he knew she could not falter. Her pulse raced, but not just from fear. There was awe here. Something stirring deep in her chest that had nothing to do with wolves, or clan gatherings, or shame. She dared not name it yet, but she felt it, a pull toward the man who had watched her weakness and found strength. Kale turned slightly, motioning to the path ahead. No words, no commands, only an unspoken invitation to follow. She hesitated. Her legs ached, her mind reeled, and yet she stepped forward, drawn by something she could neither resist nor fully understand. The forest swallowed them in silence, shadows weaving around them like protective hands. And though danger was far from gone, and though her heart still carried the sting of rejection, Ilara felt, for the first time in hours, a fragile spark of hope. Somewhere in the night, destiny had begun to stir. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Ilara followed the faintly marked path Kale had indicated. Each step was measured, careful, her senses straining for any hint of danger. Even with the wolves gone, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made her flinch. Her body still trembled, but it was no longer just fear, it was awe. Awe at the presence beside her, silent yet commanding, a shadow she could feel more than see. Cale moved ahead, his gait effortless, almost predatory, yet never so fast as to leave her behind. He was always close enough to shield, far enough to observe. She could feel the strength coiled in him, the kind of power that did not need to roar to dominate. Even in silence, he seemed to bend the world to his will. Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking louder might shatter the fragile thread connecting her to safety. Cale's eyes flicked to her briefly, amber glinting in the dim light. His expression remained calm, unreadable. "Because you are worth saving," he said simply. The words carried no exaggeration, no embellishment, only the quiet certainty of a truth he did not need to explain. Ilara's stomach tightened. Worth saving. She had never felt worthy of anything before. Not from her clan, not from her mate, and certainly not from the harsh world that had rejected her so openly. Yet, here he was, a man, or perhaps more than a man, who had stepped from the shadows to claim her survival as if it mattered. They walked in silence for a long stretch, the forest closing around them, the cold biting at her fingers, until a clearing appeared. Moonlight spilled across it, silver and ethereal, illuminating frost on the branches like 1,000 tiny diamonds. And there, just beyond the clearing, movement shifted. Wolves. Not her kind, but predators from a rival pack, sniffing the air, eyes glinting with hunger. Ilara froze, panic rising anew. Cale stopped, and for the first time, she noticed the way his muscles tensed, subtle, silent, as though the air itself could not move without his permission. A low rumble, almost a whisper, emanated from him. The wolves hesitated, ears flattening, teeth bared in uncertainty. Cale did not move, yet the very earth seemed to recoil under his presence. Her chest heaved, fear and fascination tangled together. He was not just a man. Not just an alpha of a pack she had never met. He was a force of nature, patient, watchful, waiting to see what she would do. "You can run," he said finally, voice calm but carrying weight that made the words an order and a choice at once. She looked at him, heart hammering. Her instincts screamed to flee, to survive, but part of her wanted to stay, to prove that she was not as fragile as she had always been made to feel. She took a hesitant step forward, and then another, unsure if it was courage or stubbornness keeping her feet moving. Cale's gaze never wavered. Amber eyes followed her movements with meticulous care, noting each hesitation, each small act of bravery. He did not reach for her, did not guide her hand or shoulder. He simply observed, allowing her to navigate the danger herself, yet silently promising that he would intervene if she faltered. The wolves finally decided she was not worth the risk and melted back into the shadows, leaving only the whisper of their retreat behind. Ilara exhaled shakily, body trembling, but not from cold this time. Her chest swelled with a strange, new emotion. The rush of recognition that someone had seen her courage and had deemed it enough. Cale stepped closer then, though not so close as to intrude, and the forest seemed to acknowledge him. Silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. She wanted to speak, to ask his name, to ask why he had watched, why he had waited, but the words lodged in her throat. She realized that she was not just afraid of the forest anymore. She was afraid of what she might feel if she let herself fully look at him. And yet, she could not stop. The air around Cale shimmered with power and restraint, a tension that made every nerve in her body alive. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a spark, an unnameable pull toward him, fragile and dangerous, but undeniable. He finally turned, gesturing toward a path winding deeper into the forest. No words accompanied the movement, only the silent demand to follow, and the unspoken promise that he would not abandon her to the shadows again. Ilara took a trembling step forward, and then another, her eyes never leaving his. The forest closed around them, darkness wrapping them like a cloak, yet the fear that had pressed down on her earlier now carried a different weight. It was tempered with awe, with the slow realization that she had not just escaped death tonight. She had been chosen, watched, noticed, and valued by a force she did not yet understand. And somewhere in the hush of the night, she knew this encounter was only the beginning. The forest held many dangers yet, and she would face them, guided by a shadow that was more than shadow, more than man. A presence that had chosen to mark her path, whether she was ready or not. The night whispered around them, carrying the promise of trials to come and the faintest stir of destiny. Ilara's footsteps were quiet, almost reverent, as she followed the faint path deeper into the forest. The moonlight filtered through skeletal branches, casting silver patterns across the snow, and she felt both exposed and protected under its gaze. Her mind replayed the events of the night, the rejection, the stares, the sudden fear, and a small, stubborn ember of defiance burned in her chest. She would not allow herself to be broken entirely. Not again. She remembered the countless times she had been overlooked by her own clan. Tasks assigned to her because no one else wanted them. Praise withheld, smiles denied, voices ignoring her presence. Even in the quiet moments, when she had helped the younger children, mended torn garments, or shared a small loaf of bread with the elders, it had gone unnoticed. She had learned to smile politely, to speak softly, to make herself small and invisible, because invisibility had been her only shield. Yet now, walking in the silence of the forest, she felt a strange awareness that someone else had noticed. That someone powerful had seen more than the lowly, rejected girl the clan claimed she was. Kale followed at a distance, his gaze sharp, yet unobtrusive. Amber eyes flicked to her with interest, noting the way she carried herself, even in fear. He did not speak, did not comment, and yet the weight of his observation pressed upon her. It was a strange sensation, being seen without judgment, being measured without dismissal. His attention was a mirror, reflecting not what she had been denied, but what she truly was, resilient, quiet, and unyielding beneath the layers of shame she had been forced to wear. She stumbled slightly over a frost-coated root, and Kale's eyes narrowed. Not in anger, not even in annoyance, but in careful calculation. He had allowed her to walk, to test herself, to prove that her courage was not feigned. And now, even in her clumsy steps, he noted the quiet determination that had carried her this far. The memories came unbidden. The morning she had been dismissed by her intended mate, the laughter of the clan echoing in her ears. She had felt small then, invisible and unwanted. Yet she had survived the humiliation, she had fled into the forest, she had faced the cold and the wolves. Every act, no matter how desperate, had been an act of quiet courage, and for the first time, someone had seen it. Kale stepped lightly over the snow, and the silence stretched between them. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the air charged with anticipation. He did not offer comfort, did not provide answers, yet the very fact of his presence was enough to shift something within her. She felt seen, not for her shame, not for her low status, but for her spirit, the small flicker of light she had hidden for so long. Her eyes fell to the snow beneath her feet, to the pale shadows cast by the moon. She realized then that she had spent years hiding, shrinking herself to fit into a world that refused to acknowledge her worth. And yet, with Kale's silent watch, she felt a tentative courage stirring, a question forming in her chest. Perhaps she was meant for more than she had ever dared imagine. A distant rustle in the trees drew her gaze upward. Kale's eyes followed, scanning the darkness, calculating threats, measuring the space with an instinctive authority that made her pulse quicken. She wanted to ask him what he was, where he came from, why he had chosen to watch her, but the words felt small, insufficient. He was not here for explanations. He was here to observe, to test, to see what she was made of. And yet, even in the tension, a subtle warmth threaded through her chest. Not comfort, not safety exactly, but the faintest sense that she belonged to something larger than herself. That perhaps, for the first time, she was part of a story not written in whispers of rejection, but in quiet recognition of her own strength. The path widened, and Ilara paused, letting the night air fill her lungs. The snow shimmered, frost glinting like tiny jewels under the moon. She could feel Kale's eyes on her, steady, unwavering, and a shiver ran down her spine, not from cold, but from the awareness that she was being seen in a way she had never been before. Somewhere in the stillness, deep in the forest, a distant howl echoed, a reminder that danger had not vanished. Yet, for the first time, fear did not dominate her. She could feel it, taut, alive, but tempered by the quiet knowledge that someone more powerful than she could imagine had chosen to notice her. Kale remained in the shadows, a silent sentinel, observing the girl who had been rejected and overlooked. And as she walked forward, small steps braving the frozen forest, she realized a subtle truth. The world might have turned its back on her, but she had been seen. Truly seen. And for the first time, she felt that even in the deepest shadows, even in the coldest night, there could be a light that belonged to her alone. The forest air had grown heavier, the shadows thicker, as Elara pressed forward along the winding path. Every step felt measured, cautious, as if the trees themselves might reach out to snare her. Her fingers were numb, her lips cracked from cold, but she forced herself onward. She could not stop, not now, not when the silence of the forest was both sanctuary and threat. Then, a movement at the edge of her vision made her freeze. A pair of glowing yellow eyes glimmered between the branches, followed by another, and another. Wolves. Not the ones Kale had dispersed earlier, but a new pack, larger, hungrier, and far closer than she had expected. Her breath caught. Panic clawed at her chest, making it hard to think, hard to move. Instinct took over. She spun on her heels and ran, snow spraying behind her as claws tore at frozen ground. Branches lashed at her face and arms, yet she did not slow. Her mind raced with images of torn flesh, vicious teeth, and a cold, unyielding death. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the pack moved faster, circling, cutting off her escape. Then, a presence shifted behind her, quiet but immense, a stillness that made the wolves hesitate. She felt it before she saw it. Kale. He stepped into the clearing, a figure of motionless power, and the air itself seemed to bend around him. His amber eyes fixed on the attackers, calm and unyielding, yet every sinew of his body radiated readiness to strike. The pack froze, uncertainty flickering in their predatory gaze. Elara skidded to a halt, chest heaving. "Kale," she breathed, voice trembling. I can't." Before she could finish, he moved. Faster than thought, stronger than fear, and yet every movement was precise, measured, controlled. The wolves yelped, snapping teeth in protest, but Kale's presence alone reshaped the moment. 1, 2, 3 of the creatures fell back, retreating into the forest as if drawn by invisible chains. He did not speak, did not call her name, and yet Elara felt a fierce, unspoken command. "Do not move, do not falter, do not be afraid." The remaining wolves hesitated, muscles taut, eyes wide. Kale stepped forward, hands shifting subtly, not a strike, but an assertion of dominance so raw and natural it made the forest itself shrink back. One final low growl escaped him, not loud, not rushed, but vibrating with authority that made the ground seem to tremble beneath their feet. The wolves turned, tails tucked, disappearing into the darkness with the speed and silence of shadows fleeing dawn. Elara sank to her knees, body trembling, not from the cold, but from the rush of awe and terror, the realization of what she had just witnessed. How are you?" Her voice cracked, and she could not finish the thought. Words felt too small to describe the power she had just seen, the calm that radiated from him even in the chaos of attack. Kale finally approached, slow and deliberate, his gaze never leaving hers. He did not speak. He did not offer comfort, did not kneel or touch her. He simply stood there, massive, silent, the forest falling into respectful hush around him. And yet, the warmth of his presence pressed against her like a shield. She could feel the protection, tangible and undeniable, wrapping around her like a cloak she could never have hoped for. "You saved me," she whispered, voice trembling between awe and disbelief. His eyes held hers, amber glowing faintly in the moonlight, and the first hint of a tilt in his lips suggested neither arrogance nor pride, but acknowledgement. "I did what was necessary," he said finally, low and calm. The weight of the words carried authority, an unspoken lesson. She had been seen, and she had been valued. Elara swallowed hard. Her body still shook, her heart racing, but in that moment, she realized something profound. For the first time, she had not only survived the night. She had been protected by someone who understood her worth without question. And the slow, insistent pull toward him, mysterious, magnetic, made her pulse quicken in ways she could neither name nor resist. The forest seemed quieter now, less threatening, though she knew danger would never vanish entirely. But with Kale standing near, unmoving, commanding without words, the world felt a fraction safer. The hum of life in the shadows carried a rhythm she could trust, a cadence that promised she was not truly alone. As the last echo of the wolves faded into the distance, Ilara realized the depth of what had shifted. Her heart, broken just hours before, began to beat to a new rhythm. Not fear alone, but awe, trust, and the faintest whisper of longing. Cale remained silent, yet every step he took signaled protection, every movement a quiet lesson. She was no longer just a girl abandoned by her clan. She was seen. She was marked by presence and power. And she was, somehow, no longer entirely alone in the dark. The night stretched on, thick with snow and shadow, and for the first time, Ilara dared to imagine that the forest, terrifying and unyielding as it could be, might also hold a spark of something else, a presence that could guide her, shield her, and perhaps, one day, claim her heart. The small clearing Cale led her to felt impossibly still, as if the forest itself had drawn a protective circle around them. Snow drifted softly from the branches above, settling in quiet heaps on the ground, and the pale moonlight shimmered across the frozen earth. Ilara sank onto a fallen log, shivering from cold and exhaustion, the events of the night pressing against her chest. Every muscle ached, but the ache was nothing compared to the lingering tremor of adrenaline and fear. Cale remained a few paces away, standing at the edge of the clearing, his gaze sweeping the shadows like a sentinel. His presence filled the space without a word, a quiet power that both reassured and unnerved her. He did not kneel, did not reach out. He simply existed, an immovable force in the night, and she felt drawn to him despite the invisible barrier he maintained. I don't even know who you are, she whispered, voice trembling. Her fingers rubbed at her arms, trying to warm the spots the cold had claimed, but also trying to fend off the strange flutter in her chest. He tilted his head slightly, amber eyes meeting hers briefly, as if acknowledging her question without answering it. That single look held 1,000 unspoken words, observation, understanding, and a faint trace of curiosity. It was unsettling and comforting at once. Ilara swallowed, trying to steady her racing heart. Why did you help me? She asked again, this time louder, steadier, though still cautious. Cale's gaze softened imperceptibly, though he said nothing at first. The silence stretched, and in it, she realized he was waiting, not for her answer, but for something deeper. Something beyond words. She wondered, not for the first time, if he could see everything she had tried so hard to hide, the trembling vulnerability, the lingering shame, the quiet strength that refused to be broken completely. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured, yet resonant in the night. Because you are alive. The words seemed almost too simple, yet they carried a weight that pressed gently against her chest. Alive. Not just surviving, but enduring. Not just trembling in fear, but continuing forward despite it. She felt the strange, delicate stir of something that had never awakened before. A sense that someone had truly noticed her, not as a rejected girl, not as a shadow of her clan, but as a person who mattered. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying the distant howls of unknown wolves, but the danger felt muted under Cale's presence. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge the space between them, the tension and calm coexisting in the same breath. Ilara's gaze drifted to his hands, relaxed at his sides yet subtly tense, ready for movement if necessary. Every inch of him radiated control, power, and restraint, yet there was no cruelty in it. Only awareness, and perhaps, for the first time, a hint of protectiveness that extended beyond simple survival. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to unravel the enigma of him, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she lifted her eyes to his and found herself searching for something there. Answers, understanding, a bridge between the isolation she had always known and the quiet acknowledgement he offered without a single gesture of comfort. Cale shifted slightly, his gaze lingering, and though he did not move closer, she felt a subtle warmth in the space he occupied. It was a warmth that invited trust, a gentle command that asked her to believe, if only for a moment, that the night held more than fear. I don't know if I can, she murmured, and the sentence trailed off into the hush of the clearing. She did not need to finish. He understood the rest. He had seen her falter, seen her stumble through the forest, seen the courage she had not even acknowledged in herself. For the first time, Ilara realized that connection did not require words, not entirely. It could exist in silence, in shared glances, in the subtle rhythm of breath and heartbeat. She felt it now, a tether forming, tenuous but undeniable, between her and the man who had entered her night like a shadow, yet carried the weight of something larger than herself. The forest shifted again, a distant rustle of movement reminding her that danger had not vanished, that the night could turn without warning. Yet she did not move. She remained on the log, shivering, but rooted in a fragile courage, strengthened by the quiet knowledge that Cale was near. Not touching, not commanding, not even speaking, yet wholly present. She dared a small glance at him, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked. Something passed between them, unspoken, delicate, and intimate. A promise, perhaps. A recognition that even in the cold, the darkness, the rejection that had chased her from her clan, she was not alone. Cale finally turned, a subtle motion, and moved toward the edge of the clearing. Not to leave, not to retreat, but to guide, to remain a silent sentinel as she absorbed the enormity of the night. Ilara watched him, heart swelling with a mixture of awe and something tender she had not yet named, and felt the first flicker of trust that was not forced, but earned. For the first time, the forest no longer felt endless or cruel. It was a place of shadows, yes, but also a place where someone had chosen to watch over her, quietly, carefully, and with the unspoken weight of protection that could not be measured in words. And as snow drifted from the branches, settling softly around them, Ilara felt the delicate stirrings of hope, for survival, for belonging, and for the whisper of something more. Ilara had begun to feel, for the first time in weeks, that the forest offered more than danger. With Cale near, silent and commanding, she had walked with cautious confidence, her senses sharpened but no longer paralyzed by fear. Yet the night was far from done, and the world had a way of reminding her that safety was never permanent. A faint rustle carried across the snow. At first, she thought it was just the wind, whispering through the skeletal branches, but something in the movement was deliberate, too measured, too purposeful. Cale's amber eyes flicked toward it instantly, and she felt the subtle tightening of his muscles, a coil of readiness that made the very air seem heavier. "They know where we are," Cale murmured, voice low, almost a growl, yet steady. "We are not alone." Ilara's stomach turned. She had thought the worst of the wolves had passed. But this was different. These were not animals driven by hunger. They were hunters guided by knowledge, by betrayal. Her pulse quickened, and she realized with a sinking heart that someone from her clan must have led them here. Someone who had seen her escape, someone who had wanted her dead or at least in their power. I trusted them," she whispered, voice barely audible over the crunch of snow beneath their feet. A bitter wave of shame washed through her. She had been taught to trust her clan, and yet here, in the silent night, she understood the fragility of that belief. Cale's eyes darkened, amber gleaming with something fierce and silent. His jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat, Ilara felt the full weight of his presence, the alpha who observed, who protected, who would not allow injustice to stand. She had never seen him angry before, and the intensity sent a shiver down her spine. Before she could ask what to do, movement erupted from the shadows. Figures surged forward, lithe and purposeful. She recognized the marks on their cloaks, members of a rival pack, the ones who had once circled her in hunger and malice. And yet, these wolves were guided, coordinated, as if someone had whispered her location into the night. Cale stepped in front of her instantly, the ground seeming to tremble beneath his authority. His presence was magnetic, a force that bent the very air, and the attackers faltered. Not fear alone, but hesitation, respect, recognition that the man before them was no ordinary alpha. "You betrayed her," Cale's voice broke the silence, low and deadly, aimed at the shadows beyond. Every word was measured, yet it carried the weight of justice, of wrath restrained but inevitable. The intruders froze. A murmur of whispers reached Ilara's ears, carrying the sting of treachery. A member of her clan had revealed her hiding place, trading loyalty for gain, for favor, for reasons she dared not imagine. Her chest tightened. She had already been rejected once, publicly humiliated, and now she was hunted again, not by fate, not by chance, but by those who were meant to stand beside her. She wanted to run, to flee into the safety of the trees, but Cale's presence rooted her. He did not order her to stay, he simply stood, commanding, protective, a wall of silent power. The first attacker lunged, But Kale moved faster. Not a strike, not a roar, but a controlled motion that sent the wolf stumbling backward, teeth snapping harmlessly at air. Another advanced, and Kale's hand flicked, subtle yet decisive, and it too faltered. Every movement was a lesson in authority, dominance, and restraint. Ilara's heart pounded, not from fear alone, but from awe at the man who had saved her again and again, without fully breaking his silence. In the chaos, Ilara's mind raced. She could run, but running would only leave her exposed. She could hide, but she had no skill for stealth beyond this moment. Instead, she did the only thing she could. She stayed close to Kale, letting the rhythm of his presence guide her, letting the confidence radiating from him fill the void in her own. The attackers finally retreated, stumbling into the shadows, hesitant to challenge the alpha who had claimed vigilance over her. But the night's events left a lingering ache in her chest, a bitter mix of betrayal, fear, and the dawning realization that trust was fragile, even among those she had once called allies. Kale's amber gaze returned to her, steady and unreadable. He did not speak, yet the message was clear: she was safe, for now. And though his silence was absolute, she felt the quiet promise beneath it, that he would not allow her to be hunted again, that he would confront the injustice, that he would not let treachery stand unpunished. Ilara sank to her knees, shivering from the cold and from the storm of emotions inside her. Her chest ached with relief, fear, and something deeper, a growing awareness that her life had shifted irreversibly. She had been rejected, hunted, and betrayed, yet here she was, still breathing, still alive, and protected by a presence so powerful it could shape the very forest around her. And in the silence that followed, she understood something vital. Her life was no longer entirely her own, nor entirely fragile. She had survived betrayal, and someone had chosen to claim her safety as his own. Kale remained near, vigilant, amber eyes sweeping the darkness, a silent guardian, and Ilara felt, for the first time, the fragile stirrings of trust, and something more, unspoken, intimate, yet undeniable, beginning to take root in the frozen night. The forest was quiet now, but the tension from the betrayal still clung to Ilara like a second skin. Her muscles ached from running, her lungs burned with every breath, and her heart still pounded from the adrenaline of near death. And yet, something inside her had shifted. She could feel it, a spark, small but stubborn, that whispered she was more than the fragile girl the world had always claimed her to be. Kale walked beside her, silent as always, amber eyes scanning the shadows with effortless control. His presence was no longer just a shield, it was a challenge, a call to rise. He did not intervene unless necessary, and she sensed that tonight he expected her to prove something, to herself, and perhaps to him. The path narrowed, snow drifts piling higher, and suddenly a figure emerged from the darkness. Another rival pack, hungry and relentless, had tracked them. They advanced cautiously, confident, assuming the girl would scatter or falter. Kale stepped forward, a warning ripple through the air, yet he did not strike immediately. Ilara froze, panic threatening to take hold, but something inside her flared. No one would decide her fate again. Not her mate, not her clan, not the predators circling in the shadows. She planted her feet firmly in the snow, arms rising slightly, not a gesture of attack, but of readiness. The pack hesitated. She saw the flicker of uncertainty, the calculation in their yellow eyes. Her chest rose and fell steadily, breath misting in the cold air. She did not flee. She did not plead. She faced them, and the forest seemed to recognize it. For the first time, she realized Kale had not moved to stop them, not because he could not, but because he wanted to see her strength awaken. One of the wolves lunged, and instinct drove her to sidestep, agile in ways she had never known she could be. Another came closer, and she grabbed a fallen branch, swinging it with precision born of desperation. Not perfect, not strong enough to kill, but enough to startle, enough to show defiance. Kale's amber eyes narrowed, not with judgment, but with recognition. A slow, almost imperceptible tilt of his head, a quiet acknowledgement. She was rising to meet the danger herself. The predators paused, confused, hesitant, unsure how to respond to the girl who refused to be weak. She could feel her heartbeat steadying, a rhythm replacing panic with focus. Her body moved with a clarity that surprised her. Every dodge, every swing, every step was calculated, controlled. And then, a sound, the low rumble of Kale's growl behind her, reminded her that she was not alone. But it no longer commanded her. It joined her. His strength became a mirror of her own, a silent reflection that empowered her rather than overshadowed her. The pack finally withdrew, unnerved by her courage and the subtle dominance radiating from Kale. Ilara sank to her knees, snow pressing cold against her palms, chest heaving, not from fear, but from triumph. She had faced them. She had survived. She had not merely endured, she had acted. Kale stepped forward then, close enough for the warmth of his presence to brush against her, but he did not touch her. His eyes studied her, amber fire softening into something unreadable, and she felt a thrill of awareness stir deep in her chest. He had seen her courage, recognized it, and yet had not interfered unnecessarily. The act itself was more intimate than any touch. He had let her rise, let her prove her worth, and now, silently, he acknowledged it. "You have strength," he said quietly, almost reverently. The words were simple, but they carried weight that shook her more than the attack ever could. Not just physical strength, but something deeper. Resilience. Will. Spirit. Ilara's lips parted, unsure how to respond. For so long, no one had seen her like this. No one had acknowledged the quiet battles she fought every day, the courage required simply to survive, to persist. And now, in the silent watch of the Alpha beside her, she felt the stirrings of pride, and something more. He remained near, a sentinel, and though he offered no more words, the bond between them deepened. She felt his trust, his acknowledgement, and the subtle hint of admiration that had never been offered before. It was intoxicating, dangerous in a way that made her pulse quicken, and yet it was grounding, affirming, a quiet lifeline in the cold night. Ilara realized, as snowflakes drifted around them, that she had changed. She was no longer just the girl rejected, hunted, betrayed. She was a girl who could face danger, who could rise despite fear, who could earn recognition from the most powerful presence in the forest. And in that quiet, impossible realization, she felt a stirring of something dangerous yet irresistible. The first hint of hope, of desire, and of the slow-burning bond with the Alpha who had silently claimed her courage. The night stretched on, vast and still, but Ilara no longer felt small. She had discovered a strength she had never believed existed, and Kale had seen it. In the unspoken connection between them, in the shared triumph and quiet acknowledgement, she understood the first taste of a truth that would shape the rest of her life. She was no longer powerless. And he had noticed. The forest had grown quieter now, the snow muffling distant sounds and casting a pale glow across the frost-covered earth. Ilara moved cautiously, her eyes darting to every shadow, ears straining for even the faintest sound. Though she had proven her strength, the memory of the rival pack still lingered, a chilling reminder that danger was never far. Kale walked a few steps ahead, silent as always, his amber eyes scanning the darkness with effortless command. He did not need to speak for her to sense his watchfulness. Every subtle shift in his stance, every quiet pause, spoke of his vigilance. And yet, tonight, there was something more, a deliberate closeness, a gentle tethering of presence that she could not name but could feel pressing against her chest. A snapping branch echoed sharply behind her. Ilara spun, heart pounding, and froze as a shadow lunged from the darkness. A rogue wolf, small but aggressive, eyes glowing with malice. Panic surged through her, raw and sharp, and she stumbled backward, breath catching in her throat. Kale was there instantly. Not running to her, not shouting, but moving with an effortless precision that made the air around him tremble. His hand shot out, catching her shoulder as the wolf lunged past her. The contact was brief, just enough to steady her, to anchor her trembling body, but it sent a shiver coursing through her. "Stay close," he murmured, voice low and commanding, yet strangely tender. The single touch carried more than guidance. It was protection, assurance, and a subtle, intoxicating intimacy that both startled and thrilled her. Ilara's pulse raced. She could feel the warmth of his hand lingering, though he did not press, did not hold. It was enough. Enough to make her aware of the strength and restraint that surrounded her, enough to ignite a tension she had never felt before. The rogue wolf snarled again, but Kale's eyes flared, amber glowing in the dim light. With a subtle movement, he stepped in front of her, a wall of presence that made the predator hesitate. The air seemed to bend around him, heavy with authority and the unspoken warning, "Do not test me." Ilara's chest heaved, not from exertion but from the raw intensity of the moment. She felt an unfamiliar mix of fear, awe, and a stirring of longing that she could neither define nor resist. The way Cale moved, restrained yet decisive, made the air between them almost electric. The wolf finally retreated, unnerved by Cale's dominance, disappearing into the shadows. Ilara's knees nearly gave way, but his hand remained on her shoulder, steadying her. The contact was brief, but the weight of it lingered. She could feel the slow, deliberate rhythm of his pulse through her fingertips, the warmth seeping into her frozen skin. "You're safe," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. But the words carried more than assurance. They carried recognition, acknowledgement, and a subtle intimacy that made her chest ache with a desire she had never dared name. Ilara swallowed hard, eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, the forest seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them, bound by silence, trust, and the dangerous pull of something unspoken. She wanted to speak, to ask him what it meant, to bridge the invisible gap between them, but the words failed her. They were unnecessary. The touch had said everything. Cale finally withdrew his hand, stepping back just enough to release the anchor, but the tension remained. She could still feel it lingering in the space between them, electric and forbidden, a promise restrained by both circumstance and code. The forest around them seemed unchanged, but Ilara knew something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer just a girl surviving in the shadows. She was being watched, protected, acknowledged, and in the smallest of gestures, claimed. Not publicly, not fully, but enough to ignite a longing that was both thrilling and terrifying. For the first time, Ilara realized the truth she had been resisting. She wanted him to touch her again, to guide her, to protect her. Not for the heat of desire, but for the quiet, intimate certainty that came with his presence. And she knew, deep in the hollow of her chest, that he felt it too, the dangerous, electric pull that neither of them could yet name, but that both would obey in the unspoken ways of trust, protection, and a slow-burning bond that could not be ignored. The forest stretched on, dark and endless, but the path before them no longer felt lonely. She walked close to Cale, Shadow, and Sentinel, and the silence between them hummed with something forbidden, fragile, and powerful. The night had tested her courage. It had drawn out strength she did not know she possessed. And in that quiet, suspended moment, it had also drawn out the first delicate strands of something neither of them could yet define, but both felt deeply, irresistibly, impossible to deny. The forest had grown unnervingly silent, the snow soft underfoot but carrying the echo of unseen threats. Ilara moved cautiously, every nerve alert, every breath shallow. She should have felt safe beside Cale, but the events of the night weighed on her chest, heavier than any snowstorm. The memory of the rival pack, the betrayal of her own clan, lingered like a shadow refusing to dissipate. Then, it happened, swift, silent, and brutal. Figures emerged from the darkness, moving like predators in perfect synchronization. She barely had time to react before strong hands seized her from behind, pulling her off her feet. A gasp tore from her lips, muffled by cold and panic, and she struggled with all her strength. But there were too many, and they were too skilled. "Ilara!" The cry tore through the night, fierce and controlled. Cale's voice was like steel wrapped in fire. She felt the pull of his presence even as they dragged her away, but it was fading, distant. Panic surged, raw and blinding. She clawed at the arms that held her, screaming, but the forest swallowed her voice. Her heart hammered as she was hauled into a sleet-covered clearing. Shadows pressed close, and she recognized the markings on the attackers. Members of the rival clan, opportunistic and merciless. Fear coiled inside her chest like a living thing. She had survived rejection, betrayal, and the forest's darkness. But this felt absolute, unavoidable. Cale appeared at the edge of the clearing, amber eyes blazing, every muscle taut with restrained fury. He moved with terrifying precision, but the attackers were skilled, and the moment they saw him, they tightened their grip on Ilara, using her as leverage. Her breath caught, chest heaving, as she realized just how fragile her hold on safety had become. "Let her go." Cale's voice rolled through the clearing, a low command that vibrated with authority and promise of retribution. But the rival clan held firm, eyes flicking to one another, knowing that the girl was a prize, a bargaining chip, a pawn in a game that she had never agreed to play. Ilara's mind raced. She had been careful, brave, clever, but she was no match for their combined strength. Panic, despair, and anger twisted together in a sharp knot in her stomach. Her hands flailed, her voice cracked, and for the first time, she felt utterly powerless, not because of fear, but because the one person she trusted most could not reach her without risking everything. Kale circled the clearing, eyes scanning, calculating, his control absolute. Yet she saw it, the tiniest flicker of something deeper, raw, and dangerous beneath the calm surface. Anger, desperation, determination. He would not lose her. Not now. Not ever. The attackers began to drag her toward the edge of the forest, and Ilara felt tears prick her eyes. Her body shook, not from cold but from the suffocating weight of separation. She had survived so much, endured so much, and now she faced the terrifying possibility that this night might end differently, that she might be lost entirely, swallowed by a world that had never wanted her safe. Kale! Her cry split the night, raw with fear and longing. She wanted him to fight, to charge, to save her, but the fear in her chest was overwhelming. What if he could not reach her in time? What if his strength, even his formidable power, was not enough to undo what was being done? Kale's amber eyes locked on her, and in that moment, she felt something impossible. Even from a distance, even across the cruel gap imposed by danger, she felt the tether of his presence. It was a promise unspoken, a vow unbroken. She was not alone. He would find her. He would protect her. And somehow, impossibly, he would not let this night end in despair. But the attackers pressed forward, and the forest swallowed her as they disappeared into the shadows. Ilara's heart screamed, chest tight, breath ragged. Desperation, fear, and longing coursed through her, mingling with a strange, aching hope that Kale would not abandon her. That he could not. Even as the night stretched on, vast and merciless, she clung to that thread. She had survived betrayal, rejection, and fear. But now, in the cold grasp of separation, she understood the true meaning of longing, of dependence, of hope placed in the hands of someone far stronger, far more determined than herself. And somewhere in the distance, beneath the same pale moon, Kale's presence burned like a promise through the dark, waiting, calculating, preparing. Ilara shivered, not from the cold, but from the terrifying certainty that she had been taken, that danger had won this moment, and that her fate rested entirely in the hands of the Alpha who had already claimed her, if only in silence. The wind tore through the forest like a living thing, whipping snow into swirling sheets that stung Ilara's face as she struggled against her captors. Every step felt like sinking in ice, every breath a razor against her lungs. She had tried to stay calm, tried to muster strength, but fear clawed at her relentlessly. Every moment away from Kale's presence left her feeling smaller, weaker, more exposed. Then came the sound she had been waiting for, a low, resonant growl, carrying across the trees with a weight that made her captors falter. Her head snapped up. Amber eyes cut through the blizzard, blazing with a fire she had never dared imagine could belong to anyone. Kale had arrived. He moved through the snow with the quiet inevitability of a storm, each step deliberate, powerful, radiating authority that made even the wolves hesitate. The forest itself seemed to bend to his presence. The attackers tightened their grip on Ilara, sensing danger too late, and she caught a glimpse of the subtle tension in their postures. Before anyone could react, Kale struck. Not with blind rage, but with the precision and control that made his strength terrifying. One opponent was flung aside like a ragdoll, another fell back, teeth snapping at empty air. Ilara's breath caught, half in awe, half in disbelief. He moved like a shadow made flesh, calm, unstoppable, deliberate in every motion. Ilara! His voice rang through the blizzard, sharp and commanding, yet filled with warmth and a tether of reassurance. Her heart leapt. Relief, hope, and an ache of longing collided inside her chest. The remaining attackers hesitated, but Kale did not. With emotion as fluid as it was absolute, he advanced, every step a declaration of dominance, every glance a warning. She belonged to him, and none would challenge it. Then, he reached her. His hand lifted, strong yet controlled, brushing the snow from her cloak as he pulled her close for the first time, not merely protective, but possessive. She could feel the heat of his body, the power that radiated from him, the certainty of his claim. "You are mine," he whispered, low and intimate, yet carrying across the clearing like thunder in a storm. The words were absolute, leaving no space for question. The rival pack faltered, eyes wide with understanding and fear. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Ilara's chest heaved, not from exertion, but from the intensity of the moment, from the rush of validation and relief that washed over her. Kale did not release her. Not yet. His other hand swept a final, controlling gesture through the snow, sending the last of the attackers stumbling into retreat. And then, he turned his gaze to the surrounding area, amber eyes blazing, a silent warning to anyone who might consider challenging what he had claimed. Ilara's knees trembled, but she stood, anchored by the warmth and presence of the alpha at her side. For the first time in her life, she felt the full weight of protection, the unyielding power of someone who would stop at nothing to ensure her safety. And in that protection, in the claim he had made, public, undeniable, and final, she felt her own heart rise, swelling with a mixture of awe, trust, and a slow-burning desire she could no longer ignore. The snow settled around them, silent and pristine, as if the forest itself had acknowledged the shift. She was no longer the girl rejected, hunted, and overlooked. She was seen. She was valued. And she was claimed, not privately, not quietly, but publicly, irrevocably, by the alpha who had silently marked her worth long before anyone else had noticed. Kale's hand remained on her shoulder, firm, possessive, yet gentle enough to convey the restraint he had mastered over years of power. Ilara's pulse raced, not from fear, but from the thrilling, intoxicating knowledge that she was no longer invisible, no longer alone, no longer vulnerable to the cruelty of the world. And in the quiet aftermath, as the last echoes of the rival pack vanished into the darkness, she dared to lift her eyes to his. Amber met green, and in that gaze, a promise was exchanged: he would not let harm touch her again. She was his. Protected. Chosen. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the stirring of something deeper, a slow, inevitable pull toward the man who had claimed her not just in strength, but in heart. The forest seemed to exhale, a hush settling over the snow and trees. Ilara stood taller, no longer trembling, no longer shrinking. She had survived, she had been claimed, and she had been seen in a way that transcended fear, danger, and rejection. And Kale, ever the sentinel, stood beside her, unwavering, fierce, and impossibly close. A presence that promised not just protection, but the beginnings of something neither of them could yet name, but both had already begun to feel. The warmth of Kale's claim lingered in Ilara's chest like a fragile ember, but the forest outside their haven was not the only place where shadows lurked. Even as snow drifted silently over the treetops, whispers traveled faster than wind. Words sharp as ice, sharp enough to cut into the fragile peace she had finally found. Her clan had watched. They had observed, whispered, and judged. Even after Kale's public assertion, some could not bear the reversal of fortune. The girl they had rejected now standing under the shadow and protection of the most formidable alpha the forest had ever known. Murmurs of jealousy, suspicion, and resentment followed her like ghosts, unrelenting and merciless. Ilara walked beside Kale, who moved with his usual measured grace, amber eyes scanning every tree line, every shadow, every hint of movement. She had once thought she understood fear, once believed she knew humiliation, but this was subtler, sharper. A glance, a hushed laugh, a pause in a conversation, and she could feel the weight of judgment pressing against her, trying to force her to shrink once again. Kale's hand brushed against hers, not fully, not intentionally, but enough for her to feel the anchor of his presence. She flinched at first, then allowed herself to settle into it, drawing courage from the quiet assertion that he would not let the whispers dictate her worth. "They will talk," he said, voice low and smooth, carrying a weight that made even the cold seem less biting. "They always do. But they cannot take this from you. Not now. Not ever." Ilara's eyes met his, green to amber, and she saw the calm certainty that had become his signature. It was more than protection. It was trust, faith in her resilience, in the bond forming between them. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean on it, to feel it, without guilt or fear. As they moved closer to her clan's territory, she could sense the tension shift. Eyes followed her, assessing, calculating. Some clansfolk bowed their heads in begrudging acknowledgement, others avoided her gaze entirely, unwilling to confront the girl they had dismissed. And in that mixture of awe, envy, and resentment, Ilara found a strange satisfaction. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer powerless. And she had someone beside her whose strength and quiet assertion was impossible to ignore. A figure stepped forward, a familiar face from her past, eyes narrowing as they scanned her. Ilara stiffened, bracing herself for ridicule, accusation, or contempt. But Cale's presence was a tether she could cling to, his subtle grip on her arm, his watchful gaze, a silent promise that she would not face this alone. "You have changed," the figure said finally, voice clipped with caution. Not just claimed, but stronger. Fearless. Ilara exhaled softly, letting the weight of the compliment and the acknowledgement settle over her. She felt the faint stir of pride, a new strength blossoming within her, tempered by survival, shaped by trust, and nurtured by the presence of the alpha who had chosen her. Cale's gaze lingered on her, amber fire softened by an emotion she could not name, but felt deep in the hollow of her chest. Admiration. Respect. Perhaps even something more, something tender, deliberate, and undeniable. And though he did not speak, she understood him perfectly. They were partners now, bound not just by circumstance, but by choice, by trust, and by the unspoken promise that neither would let the other falter again. The shadows of the past remained, ever present, but Ilara no longer felt small beneath them. She walked taller, chest lifted, courage steadied, knowing that whispers could not diminish what had been claimed. Cale's hand brushed hers again briefly, a subtle anchor in a sea of judgment, and she felt the first delicate stirrings of desire tempered by trust, respect, and an intimacy that words could never capture. As the night deepened and the clan watched from a distance, she realized the truth she had always feared to embrace. She was no longer defined by rejection, by low status, or by the judgments of others. She was defined by the bond she shared with Cale, by the courage she had discovered within herself, and by the undeniable truth that someone had chosen her, fully, decisively, and forever. The shadows of the past lingered, but their weight had shifted. They could whisper, they could envy, they could plot, but Ilara was no longer the girl they had once dismissed. She was claimed, protected, seen, and in the quiet between the wind and the trees, she felt the slow, deliberate pull of a love that would not be denied, a bond that would not break, and a promise that stretched beyond fear, beyond judgment, and beyond the fragile confines of the past. The full moon hung low and luminous over the clan grounds, casting silver light across the frost-dusted trees and frozen earth. Ilara stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart thrumming in time with the quiet rustle of anticipation around her. Whispers had spread quickly. Tonight, the alpha would honor her. Tonight, the girl who had once been rejected would be seen, protected, and claimed before all. Cale emerged from the shadows, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every clan member. Amber eyes gleamed beneath the pale moonlight, steady, unyielding, and full of quiet fire. The air seemed to bend around him, charged with authority and power, and yet there was softness woven through it, a tenderness reserved only for her. Ilara's chest swelled with emotion. She had endured so much, rejection, betrayal, fear, and now, at last, the world would witness what she had always been. Strong, courageous, and worthy of the alpha's unwavering devotion. Cale approached, his steps deliberate, each one a silent declaration. The murmurs of the clan softened, uncertainty mixing with awe. He stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the weight of his control. "You have faced danger, betrayal, and fear," he said, voice low and steady, yet carrying across the clearing like a pulse in the night. "You have proven your courage, your strength, and your heart. And now, before all, I claim you, not as property, not as a prize, but as my equal, my mate, my heart." A hush fell over the crowd. Ilara's breath caught. She had dreamed of this moment quietly, in secret, in the hollow spaces of her heart, but hearing it, spoken aloud, felt impossible, overwhelming, and intoxicating all at once. Cale stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers, fingers intertwining with deliberate care. The contact was tender, protective, and intimate in a way that left her trembling. Every gaze from the watching clan was a reminder that her past rejection was gone, erased by the undeniable power and public declaration of the alpha who had chosen her. "You are mine," he repeated, amber eyes locking with her green ones. This time, there was no restraint, no subtle hesitation, only certainty, devotion, and the deep, abiding fire that had been building between them since the first moment he noticed her courage. Ilara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of triumph, not sorrow. She had survived the shadows, the whispers, and the dangers that had hunted her relentlessly. And now, she stood proud, unafraid, and fully seen. Her hand tightened around his, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them, delicate yet unbreakable. Cale lowered his other hand to her cheek, thumb brushing along the curve with care, reverence, and a quiet heat that made her pulse spike. "Forever," he whispered. "Bound under the moon, by the truth of what we share, by the strength of what we are together." The moonlight bathed them in silver radiance as he drew her close, close enough that the warmth of his body pressed against hers, a promise of protection, desire, and unwavering loyalty. The crowd fell silent, witnessing the culmination of a journey that had been fraught with danger, betrayal, and heartbreak, but now radiated hope, justice, and undeniable love. Ilara's heart swelled, a flood of emotion breaking through every wall she had built. She had been rejected, hunted, and cast aside, but no more. She was claimed, honored, and recognized, and the alpha who had chosen her stood unwavering, fierce, and tender all at once. As they stood beneath the moon, the wind carrying whispers of the past away into nothingness, she realized the impossible truth: she was safe. She was desired. She was cherished. And most of all, she was loved, not quietly, not in secret, but boldly, publicly, and completely. The forest and clan grounds seemed to exhale around them. Cale pressed his forehead to hers, amber eyes softening as he whispered again, "Forever, Ilara. No shadow, no fear, no past shall touch you. You are mine, and I am yours." Ilara's lips curved into a smile, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. The journey had been long, perilous, and wrought with pain, but in this silver, moonlit night, everything aligned. The girl who had once been hidden, rejected, and alone now stood proudly, bound to the alpha who had chosen her with unwavering certainty. And under the light of the full moon, the forest bore witness to a truth as ancient as the tides. Love, courage, and destiny, when claimed with honesty and power, cannot be denied. They remained there, bound in silence, hearts synchronized, souls entwined, and the world around them fading into the quiet perfection of fulfillment, justice, and fairytale-like triumph. For Ilara, the shadows of rejection were gone. For Cale, the girl he had chosen was finally his, forever bound, forever protected, forever in the moonlight.